Well, greetings out there in YouTube land and welcome to today's very special video. It involves the contents of this carefully wrapped package. I know it looks like a giant roast from the local butcher shop, but believe me, it's not. You're going to be very, very excited when you see what's awaiting us inside. Well, here it is. Filthy, somewhat corroded, incomplete, and absolutely magnificent. Okay, I think maybe some of you will start to get a hint of what we're looking at here. Of course, the title of the video is a tip-off, but work with me here, okay? Let's try to build some suspense. Let me flip it over and we'll take a look at the knobs. That's right, fans. We're looking at a 1961 Blonde 6G6 Bassman amp. Okay, just take a few moments to soak it all in here. And although it appears kind of grubby and rough, broken pilot light, loose power transformer, which is a little worrisome, but we'll see. Maybe they just needed to steal that bell cover from it. Okay, but when we look inside, we're going to see that it is complete and unmolested. I understand that the owner bought this at a garage sale at a price that I'm not even going to tell you because it'll give you nightmares. But it's in here for a full restoration to make this jewel as good or better than new. And it promises to be, I think, one of our better videos. Okay, because this is a rare gem. This is a tube-rectified Bassman, okay? They use a GZ34. This is before they even went to solid-state rectification. So this ought to really be something, and I can't wait. Ollie and Jack are already excited about the audio demonstration. So grab your beer and get ready because I think this is going to be a pretty exciting ride. Okay, before I even get started in making a list of all the parts I need to order, looks like we've got a bent control panel here, and also just for the sake of not tearing loose any wires, I'm going to bolt the power transformer back in. I'll show you all this when I get through. Okay, let's look here at the top at the transformers. I don't have the exact length of number 10 screws necessary to resecure the transformer, so I'm going to have to go to the hardware store. But meanwhile, let's take a look at what we have here. We don't have that stamped in number to verify that this is the original power transformer, but I'm going to guarantee you it is. It looks like at some time or other somebody removed that cover from it. I hope that's the only reason that the screws are missing. I also can't imagine that anybody would loot some insignificant piece like that from such a fantastic chassis. Can you imagine what type of amp they took the cover from this one to fit? Okay, we can look here, and the filter choke and output transformers are exactly right. I've got 3 of the 4 tube shields, and fortunately I'm going to dig through my stash and I think I can find a 4th one that will match. Okay, here's the one that I'm going to use as the 4th shield. You can see it's about the same amount of grunge and all. It's a little darker, but who's going to notice? Okay, here's the schematic. It's a 6G6. Now there is a 6G6A which uses the diode rectification, but if you notice, the 6G6 uses the trusty GZ34 tube rectifier. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 7025s and a pair of 5881s. Okay, here's our 4 7025s, 5881s, and the mighty GZ34 rectifier. So far so good. On top, of course, we need to open the little doghouse here and check to see if I'm going to bet you we still have the original electrolytic filter caps. Let's open that and take a look. It's my understanding this amp spent probably the last 40 or 50 years in an attic somewhere, and look at this. You take off the doghouse. See a little corrosion here, maybe from some of the electrolyte in the original filter caps. Look at these shiny resistors. Look how clean underneath that doghouse. Look how shiny. That's what the chassis used to look like. Talk about a time capsule. This is absolutely incredible. This is exactly the type of amp I like to work on. Okay, this has not been fooled with by a bunch of, drunk chimpanzees or anything. This is just the way it left the factory, with a few missing pieces, but so what? Okay, it has not been maliciously altered in any way. Okay, I hope you're getting excited, because I am. We've got a whole bunch of original power cord, and as long as it is, it apparently wasn't long enough, because this lovely addition was put on the end here from an old extension cord. I can imagine how exciting that would be to pick up while the amp's operating. Okay, so naturally this is all going to be, well, no, I'm not going to replace this. I think I'll just leave this on here, okay, just to make things quaint. But anyway, you see, that's the only repair that's been done shoddily. This thing is better than virtually any amp I've worked on in a long time. Here's the rear control panel with that ground polarity switch. Looks like we're going to need to come up with a proper outside part here of the fuse holder. 3 amp too. It's a healthy circuit. Toggles seem fine, and then the magic words: Fender Electric Instrument Company, Fullerton, California. Speaker and external speaker. Oh, you can't help but get misty-eyed when you see one of these beauties like this. After 50 or so years of benign neglect, in just a few days it's going to be up and running and singing like an angel. If any of you have any spare transformer covers sitting around taking up space on your shelves, okay, here are the dimensions of this one. Center to center on the holes, 2 3/4, 3 7/16. This central hump here requires about 3 inches by 2 1/4 inch. Okay, and it appears to be, say, around 3/4 of an inch tall. Okay, so if you do have the missing cover for this transformer, let me know your price and I will gladly buy it from you. Looking here at the front control panel, I have the screw-in jewel to complete the pilot light. Looks like we're going to need one of the blonde knobs. Okay, now I believe they remake these. I can buy a new one. But if anybody out there has a nice original and you'd like to sell it, please let me know. Everything else looks just fine here on the front control panel. Little blemish right here, but hey, we've all got them, don't we? Okay. Well, the parts came in from Antique Electronic Supply, and combined with the parts that I had on hand, I think we have everything we need to restore the 6G6 chassis and circuit. I went ahead and sprung for the Sprague Atom capacitors, even though they cost 3 or 4 times as much as good working equivalents. I thought only the best will do for this particular circuit. I've got the red pilot jewel, the screw-in fuse cap, a couple high wattage resistors that I didn't happen to have on hand, a couple capacitors, and a full set of vintage tubes. Okay, these are all good, strong vintage tubes. Some of them are used, some aren't, but I thought no Sovtex or other modern reproductions. Only the best will do again. Okay, then you remember the 4 shields. So I think we're in pretty good shape. I have all the other smaller components, resistors, capacitors, other things like that in stock. and of good quality. So I think we're ready to start rewiring the circuit. Now I'll tell you straight out, I have no intention of completely gutting and replacing every component in this circuit. I personally think that kind of defeats the purpose. You're in effect creating a reproduction amplifier circuit. Now granted, the yellow Astrons don't have a very good reputation. The blue molded caps do. So I am going to look very closely and we'll check both the capacitance and leakage of all of the capacitors and only keep those that seem to be functioning properly. On the electrolytics, I just have a feeling they're all going to need probably to be replaced, okay? There's no way in heck that they're still functioning properly. So I think you can kiss the cathode bypass caps goodbye. Also I have replacements for these down here for the bias circuit. And of course that's going to be the so-called death cap. So we have no need of replacing it. So I flip it over and I think we're ready to replace the mighty Astron Mini-Mite original filter caps. Just for a few snorts, I'll go ahead and do some ESR measurements on these. To be honest with you, whether they pass or not, I think I'm going to go ahead and replace them. This is a fairly high voltage, high current amplifier, and I just really think that I can't sleep at night without replacing these. Okay, I'll also check the values here of each of these resistors. They certainly look like they're in great shape. We'll see. For those of you wondering where Jack has been for the last few videos, it's because every time I'm making them, he hides out in his cat house. I think you'll be able to see him lurking. There he is, back there in his bachelor pad. Okay, I built this thing years ago, and Jack has suddenly rekindled his interest in it. So whenever we can't find him, we check inside. And now I've got a secret way of getting him out of there to reveal himself. Okay, so sit. We're going to shake out some cat food that he likes up on the roof. There he is, that little rascal. Just enough. He's like a little groundhog, just enough to eat. There he comes. Hey Jack, your fans have been missing you. Okay, now I know they're all relieved to know that you're just as healthy and as gluttonous as ever. The ESR values are rather interesting. This one right here, obviously grossly elevated, so this cap is completely untrustworthy. But check out its neighbor. The one right next to it is 1.4, which is very usable value, although I'm not going to use it. And the one just to the right of it's 9.5, which is moderately elevated. Also, I found this, which is fun. This one's not even connected at one end. Okay, so no doubt about it, varied readings here, but let's go ahead and replace all 6 of the Astron Mini-Mite with the magnificent and expensive Sprague Atoms. Here's Uncle Doug's helpful tip number 9802. When you're extracting the negative leads from the eyelet board, do not yank and insist on getting the whole lead out. Sometimes they go past the eyelet and go underneath to make contact. So you need to leave them in place. That's probably where they are grounded. And just to be sure you haven't disrupted the ground on any of these eyelets, go back with your ohm meter and make sure that each of the ground eyelets has continuity to ground before you install your replacement capacitors. Now I'll go down the line checking each of the negative eyelets to be sure that they have proper connection to ground, and they all seem. Little precautions like this taken early on can save you hours of diagnostic repair. Okay, it's very simple to do now, not so simple when the amp doesn't function right or hums later on. Now let's check the values of these 3 resistors. This is a good opportunity for us to test our ability to decode the color bands. Green, blue, orange is going to be what? 56K. And as you can see, it's right on the money. Yellow, violet, red should be 4.7K. And we see that it's 5.23. That's a little high. This one may need to be replaced. Red, violet, orange, 27K. Right on the money. So it appears there's only one that has drifted a bit out of range. Now that 4.7K carbon resistor that was out of spec has been replaced with a metal film resistor of a much closer resistance value. Now with our replacement filter caps, we want to have the values facing up so they're easily read. We want the leads to be bent so that the body of the cap is centered between the eyelets. We want the bottom of that capacitor body to be touching the floor here of the eyelet board, and we want the leads cut short enough so that they will penetrate into the eyelets but not go too far. You have a very limited amount of travel to go in straight. Okay, so once you get the first one in place, just use it as your guide for the rest. Okay, here are those Sprague atoms installed on the eyelet board. As you can see, the bodies of the capacitors are evenly spaced. They're all in line and centered between the eyelets. They're all at the same level. All the values are straight up. Okay, now this isn't perfect, but why, you ask, is it important to make something like this cosmetically attractive? And I'll tell you, it's a reflection of the care that you took while working on this amp circuit. When someone sees this type of alignment and care, they recognize you as somebody who takes pride in their work and also took pride in the work underneath, inside the chassis where it's harder to detect. Okay, so it takes a little extra time, but it's the difference between being an artist and being a hack. Now go back and pull on each of the leads, make sure that the solder connections are absolutely sound, tight, no cold solder joints, and then it's time to put the doghouse back on for now. Later, when we're testing the amp, we'll take the doghouse off to check our voltages. Okay, so for now, just for protection's sake, doghouse reinstalled. Now, because I don't have any more of this rock hard, tarry, black, wretched material on hand to put in the lid of the doghouse, I'm going to use gray weather stripping. In this case, it's like two, probably, quarter-inch thick pieces, one on top of the other. It's nice and soft and pliable, it's stable, and it'll give you a little squish on the top of the caps to hold them in place. Okay, doghouse is back in place with original screws. Time to flip this over and start working on the circuit within the chassis. Now let's address the negative DC bias supply located right here. There's several components we need to check. I ordered 8 microfarad at 150 volt electrolytics to replace these two. We also need to check the value here of this 10K resistor and of the diode lurking down there in the darkness. Also, it's noticed that the biasing supply, which ends up being about minus 56 volts, the supply from the power transformer for some reason is corroded here and separated, so it will have to be reattached to that point right down there. Now there's one thing to remember when you're replacing the electrolytics in this bias supply, and that is their polarity is the opposite of what you're accustomed to. Remember that most of our circuit runs with positive DC, we call it the B+. Well, it's negative DC, therefore the capacitors will be arranged with the positive end to ground and the negative end toward the circuit. Okay, so these are up and out of the way, and when we remove them we see there was a 56K resistor hidden under here. So that gives us one more resistor to test. And with these diodes, Diodes are very inexpensive, and you're crazy if you don't just replace this with a much higher rated diode. I'm going to do that in just a second. Okay, but it's standard practice. A lot of beginning techs get real confused with diodes, especially when there's no marks on them. This one doesn't have a band. Normally they have bands. Let's take a look at the diode I'm going to use. See the band there at one end. Also, it should be mentioned that this is a 1000 volt 3 amp diode. Okay, it's at probably 20 times more diode than we need right down here in this position. But these things cost like 35 cents. So you're crazy not to go overboard on your diode replacement. Looking at the schematic, you see here where the bias winding comes out. This is the red wire that was detached. It's going to come out here and it's going to go to the banded end of the diode and then proceed on here to the filtering system. So we want the banded end toward the power transformer. Now, since the power transformer connects here and it comes over here, we'll want the banded end then on the right side in this configuration. Okay, I've removed that pesky diode, and sure enough, underneath it is marked with positive, positive right here, and toward that winding from the power transformer. So this diode is in correctly, and when we put in our new one with the band on that right side, it will be in correctly also. Okay, here's our new diode installed with the band, which is the positive end, toward the winding of the power transformer. Next, let's check the resistance of these two carbon resistors, see if they're within range, and then we can install our two electrolytic capacitors. Okay, green, blue, orange, 56K, and we got 59. I think that's close enough, to be honest with you. Also, when we adjust the bias here, the way we're going to adjust it is to alter the value of that resistor. So for now, let's leave it in and see if we get the proper negative 56 volts up here to the grids of our output tubes. And if not, then we may have to alter it. So there's no use changing it now. Let's look, there's one other one here. How about that 10K right there? Okay, it's this one here, brown, black, orange, 10 times 1,000, 10K. Well, it's 11.2K, that's over 10% out, so let's replace that resistor. Well, I've got a 10K metal film resistor, which is right on the money. So it's about, what, 40 ohms off, so this is the one we're going to install. Okay, we've replaced the diode in the proper polarity configuration. We've tested the resistor here and found it to be acceptable, this one not, and we replaced it. Now it's time to reconnect the winding from our power transformer and replace the two 8 at 150 microfarad filter caps. The DC bias supply is now completed with all polarized components oriented in the right direction. You can see that the band of the diode is aimed toward the output from the transformer, and that the negative ends of the electrolytics go to the circuit while the positive ends are grounded. You know that this is a ground. You can see the little wire coming out from that eyelet over here and soldered down to the channel. Now how about if we focus on the normal channel input and preamp circuit. I'm going to go in and measure the values of each of the components in the circuit, and I will bring to your attention any that are out of spec, and we will replace them. I cleaned the grounding contacts on the input jacks, measured the grid stopper resistors, everything seems fine. Now I'm changing out the two bypass caps, one for 7025 at the top and the other for the lower 7025. Instead of two 25s at 25 volts, I did 25s at 50 volts, and they're both installed here, and we're back to the negative to ground because we're dealing with the B plus circuit here. So always plus the dented end here toward the positive circuit. I'm still working on that normal channel, and the volume, treble, and bass controls are giving me trouble. I finally got the volume control loosened up with some deoxit, but the treble control is real hard to turn, and the bass control is frozen solid. So I'm going to have to work on those. If I can't get them to loosen up and function properly, I'll have to replace the pots. While I'm working trying to loosen up these pots, I noticed this kind of foggy coating here on the control panel, and when I scrape it with my fingernail it comes right off. Now I don't know if that's an original protective spray coating or something that somebody slathered on here with good intentions, but I think I'll continue to scrape it off because it sure looks better without it. Well, the bass pot just would not loosen up. It's frozen solid, so I extracted it from the chassis, and I'm going to try to use some heat and pliers and crowbars and a lot of cussing. Okay, let's see if we can't get this thing loose. Wow, this was a tough one. I had to use the blowtorch on the shaft here and the threaded housing and heat it up really hot, and then get some penetrating oil to go in there. Now it's loose. It has exactly the right value of around 250K, and it sweeps nicely, so it's fixed. Okay, the three normal channel pots are back in. They're working freely and properly, and I cleaned up the front of the knobs a little bit. Now, even though it's not part of the normal channel, the presence pot is stuck absolutely rock solid also, so I'm going to do the same thing to it that I did to the bass pot. I know you think I'm kidding, but I actually do use a propane torch on these to loosen them up, and the presence control pot loosened up rather quickly. Now it's lubricated and sweeping perfectly. I'm going to reinstall. Speaking of the Fender presence control, let's take a look at it here on the schematic. As you can see, it is a negative feedback loop with a fixed 100K resistor coming down here to the long-tailed pair phase inverter, and the presence control itself consists of a 25K pot with a capacitor and resistor in parallel going to ground, so that you can tune the frequencies that you want to send to ground that will not come in here and neutralize those frequencies in the phase inverter. In the normal channel, there are two 0.1 microfarad capacitors. This one is part of the bass tone control. This one over here is the cathode bypass cap for the second triode of this 7025. I've lifted the end of one of them from the circuit. I find that the capacitance is perfect. The other one tested out just fine also. And what I'm going to do is leave them in and then test them for DC leakage. This one, the cathode bypass one, there's no need. But on this one right here, I'm going to check it for DC leakage while the circuit is functioning. Okay, everything checked out pretty well in the normal channel. It's the standard split triodes of a 7025 with both the tone and volume control in between the two triodes. Let's shift our attention up here to the bass channel, which is completely different. First off, after all the problems I had down here with the normal channel, I'm checking the pots to make sure they're not stuck, and I'm going to lubricate them and clean back where the contacts are. Now it's time to replace the two 470 ohm screen resistors attached here very tightly to the sockets of the output tubes. Because of all the heat that they face being attached here to the sockets, they tend to fail, and it's always a good idea just to replace them outright. Here are the two screen resistors installed, and instead of tucking them right here into the socket, into the midst of the heat that's rising from the tube, I put them out a little ways here to the side so they have a greater chance of survival. I think it'd be nice now to wire in a new 3-wire power cord that grounds the chassis and wire up the primary circuit here. The 3-wire power cord has now been completely installed. Comes through the original strain relief here. I disconnected all 3 of the terminals of that polarity ground switch since it's no longer needed. My way of wiring the primary circuit is to bring the hot wire down here to the toggle switch, from the toggle switch to the fuse, from the fuse through one of the primary wires into the primary winding of the power transformer. The white wire here, which is the return, is wired directly to the other primary wire. The green chassis ground, in this case, has been soldered securely to the chassis itself. A lot of people like to put the fuse first, then the toggle switch. I don't. To me, it's best to have the toggle switch first so that all of the power in the circuit is shut off when the switch is in the off position. Otherwise, someone might switch this off and then try to change the fuse. If the fuse is blown, you might get away with it because the bottom is hot. But if the fuse is still good, you could get electrocuted. Okay, so I just don't see any advantage to that. So on every amp that I work on, it's always toggle switch first, then fuse. Well, it appears that the power switch has failed. So let's replace it. And naturally, since the main power switch failed, the standby switch has to fail also. So let's replace it. Now that the primary circuit is wired, let's leave out the tubes and check to be sure that all our voltages are present. Remember, this transformer was not really connected to the chassis and was missing that top cap, so it's suspect. Let's see if it's putting out the proper voltages. First off, let's check the negative DC bias supply to the grids, and it is DC and it is negative 61 volts. So that's good. It's a little higher than what we expected, and it's easy to change if need be. Now let's check our 5-volt filament winding. Perfect. Now our 6-volt filament winding. Perfect. Now all the voltages are going to read high unless current is flowing. But this is just fine. So all 3 voltages are present. I've also hooked up to the high voltage output, and it tends to peg the meter. So it looked like it was up there on 700 and something volts before the meter defaulted. But well, like I said, that will come way down once the circuit is complete and operational. All right, I've centered the pilot light holder and put in a 6-volt bulb. Let's see if it works. Yep. Now let's screw in our jewel and our pilot light will be finished. Here we go. Not since my days in Juarez has a red light looked that good. I wanted to show you something here that perfectly demonstrates how to wire the 6.3 volt filament heaters. Notice that the 2 heater connections are made, then the wires rise straight up, arch over, come straight down, connect, up, over, straight down. None of this winding around the tube socket. These are DC wires. It doesn't matter. But with AC it matters a lot. So look, here we go. Jump. It's like a frog jumping from tube to tube. That's the right way to do it. Well, it's been a busy day. Let's go down the line quickly and see what parts have been replaced. The 6 original electrolytic capacitors, 2 resistors and a diode from the negative DC bias supply, the 2 filtering caps from that supply, 3, this is actually 2 and 1 plus 1, so 3 cathode bypass caps, 1 of the Astron 0.1 microfarad capacitors, 2 screen resistors, the wires that went to the polarity switch, the power on-off, and the standby switch, and what was left of the old AC cord. Jack and Ollie are worn out from their last audio demo session, so I'm opening this box on my own out here in the workshop. It's from a viewer named Michael Duffy. It appears to be a bunch of tubes. Let me open these boxes and lay everything out so we can see what we've received. Wow, a terrific assortment here of vintage tubes and a knob puller, which is kind of clever, roll of solder, vintage wire, rubber feet, a bunch of small components, resistors, potentiometers, something that looks sort of like a breadboard to me where you can put together circuits to test them, terminal strips, a Hammond small transformer, fuses, which are very, very useful, some little, looks like little PCB tube sockets, bunch of miscellaneous hardware, a great assortment of non-polar and electrolytic caps, and some more miscellaneous hardware. So I have to say, all in all, thanks, Michael, for thinking of us and sending this fabulous assortment of items. I guarantee you that we will put a bunch of them to use in future builds, and really appreciate your time, effort, and expense in sending them to us. Thanks again. Well, time for an update. I had a conversation with the owner of the amp, and much to my surprise, he intends to use this. Apparently he is a performing musician and he wants to use this amplifier. I didn't know that. He said then that he would really prefer all modifications be with the idea of reliability in mind. So I'm going to replace these 4 Astron capacitors. Even though they checked out okay, for the future it's probably best to have brand new caps in this position. The blue molded caps have a great reputation. I'm going to leave them in. I think they're important for the overall tone and quality of the amplifier. Fine. Now there's a second and even bigger update that I have to share with you. When we compare the normal channel with the bass channel on the 6G6 Schematic, we see there is a huge difference between the two. Let's briefly discuss that difference, and then I'm going to tell you what I think we need to do. Number one, if you notice here, this first 12AX7 or 7025 is a DC coupled cathode follower. It is not simply an amplification triode, tone control triode like we saw on the normal channel. Why do we have that? Well, it's going to have a very low impedance output, which means it will flow a lot of current. Why do you do that? Well, look at this leaky tone control here. This is strictly the bass control. This is not the treble, it's only the bass. Okay, so when you place a cathode follower like that before tone control, you greatly reduce the amount of signal loss that you will have through that tone control. Remember, these tone controls are all passive. That means the way they work is to lose signal. So this cathode follower helps reduce that signal loss. Then we come over here to what is sort of a fairly normal triode amplification state. Now that in itself is not all that weird, but this is. Look where the treble control is. It is the last component before the output stage. The entire output stage is going to run off of the wiper of the treble control. I just don't think that's a very good setup. And apparently Fender didn't either. Now let me show you why I say that. When we look at the second version that came out rather soon, notice they kept that. Okay, the only thing they changed was they went to a solid state rectification rather than the GZ34 in the 6G6. But look what happened when they went to the 6G6B. Notice something different? The treble control is inside here, in between the two amplification triodes, a much better spot for it. Okay, then the output of the normal channel and bass channel come together right here and then enter the output stage. Okay, this is a much better way to do it, and Fender knew that. That's why they upgraded the circuit. The 6G6 is very uncommon because it really wasn't a very good design. So rather than perpetuate that bad design, I'm going to convert this part of the 6G6 circuit into a 6G6B. And I'm going to embed the treble control here and make it in this form, which from what I understand from research I've done on the internet, will function way better. Time for another update. The conversion to the 6G6B circuit has been completed with the bass channel treble control in between the two triodes here of the 12AX7 instead of feeding the entire output circuit. But no matter what, I couldn't get any sound out of the bass channel. I tried everything. I've checked voltages, rewired certain connections and things like that. And then as a last-ditch effort, I just replaced the socket for that first tube. And as you can see, there's like a coating or something that's gotten in here, almost like clear lacquer has been sprayed into this. Sure enough, the minute that I put in that new socket, listen, powerful signal, just clean as can be. So it looks like we're going to have some good volume and hopefully good tone from our modified circuit. And while I was at it, I incorporated improvements in the bass tone control from the 6G6B schematic. As you can see, the values are different on the resistors. There are several different changes here that I think might be beneficial. So now the circuit is completed. I'm going to flip it over and install a pair of 6L6GC tubes. I don't have any 5881s on hand right now, and because this thing operates at a plate voltage up around 450 volts, I think only the GCs could handle it, so that's what we'll be using for the biasing procedure. We're all set up here to check the bias, and thanks to a very generous viewer, Joseph V., who sent me a second Eurotubes probe, we can actually monitor both of the output tubes simultaneously. Okay, here we go. So we're up at 476. And quite a difference in plate current. I notice that the right-hand tube, which must be a little older or something, it's flowing less current. What's this going to give us? About a 9.5 plate dissipation, which is too low for 6L6s, GCs at least. This one's going to be closer to, what, 13, 14? Okay, so it looks to me like we probably need to reduce that bias DC negative voltage so that we can increase our plate current a bit. Let's have a quick review here of our three 6L6 type of tubes. The G and GB maximum plate dissipation is 19 watts, 70% of that for fixed bias, as in this circuit, is 13.3 watts. Maximum plate voltage, they say, is 360, but we know they can go higher than that. 5881 is kind of a pepped up G or GB in that we get an extra 4 watts of plate dissipation. 70% of that would be 16.1 watts. And maximum plate voltage, again, 360, but probably just fine up around 415. Finally, the GCs, like we have installed in this circuit at the moment, look at that, plate dissipation's way up there, 30 watts, 70% of that's 21 watts, and maximum plate voltage is 500. Now you saw the plate voltage on this particular circuit right here is up around 450 or 460. So I honestly think the GCs are the way to go, but we're going to have to up that plate current a bit to increase the plate dissipation from about, what, 9 to 11. We got to get it up to, let's say, at least 16 or 17 watts. To assist in the biasing procedure, I have installed a potentiometer here that will allow us to have an infinitely adjustable bias. All I did was replace the fixed 56K resistor that ran from this corner over here to ground with a 10K and 50K pot in series to ground. Now, when I adjust it for maximum resistance, it will be 60K. Minimum would be 10K. Okay, so I've got it cranked to 60K now. Now it's time to turn on the standby switch and check our bias. Before I do, I should mention that I exchanged this rather weak right-hand GC for a stronger one that is a much better match to that left tube. Okay, so let's flip this on. Now, remember, our bias is set way low because our pot is set to maximum resistance. Now let's crank our potentiometer here just a bit, and let's bring the plate current on the stronger tube up to, say, around 38. There we go. Now let's, as you can see, we do have a better match. Let's calculate the plate dissipation with these values. Well, we get 17 and 15.3 watts respectively, which pretty well brackets what the plate dissipation would have been with 5881s. I think this is a reasonable, rather conservative biasing for these GCs that should give us good tube longevity and great tone. Okay, we'll see during the audio demonstration. One other advantage to using a potentiometer like this for setting your bias is you can use a knob like this with an indicator line and put down different plate dissipation values. So when I send this back to the owner, he can double check that it is set at 16, or if he chooses, he can crank it up to like 19 or 20 or anything in between. That'd be 17 or 18 in that open space. So as long as it's with this tube set, these figures then would apply. Okay, now I'm going to run down the line here and demonstrate how each of the tone controls works for each of the two channels, plus the presence control, so we can get an idea of how the amp circuit is working with its modifications. Let's take a final look here at the 1961 Blonde, formerly 6G6, now 6G6B amplifier chassis. As you can see, there's still some of the original capacitors and a bunch of the original resistors that have remained intact. And the bias adjustment here with the markings to enable the owner to adjust his bias quite easily and quickly to whatever level he wants. I know I started out saying I was going to preserve all of the original components I could, but when it became evident that the owner was a professional musician and wanted to use this in his performances, then it became necessary to change priorities and replace all of the large electrolytic filter caps, the electrolytic caps for the negative DC bias supply, cathode bypass caps, Astrons just because they have a bad reputation, 6 resistors, a diode. Also, during the conversion to the 6G6B, this blue molded cap ceased to be needed. Also 2 toggle switches, 3-wire power cord, and of course, a rather unusual problem with one of the 12AX7 tube sockets. All right, let's get Ollie and Jack sobered up and tuned up, and let's have a little audio demonstration of the amp with some familiar tunes that I hope you all will recognize and enjoy. Here we are all set up for the audio demonstration. We got Ollie and Jack all fired up. Okay, they snorted a little catnip and they're ready to be real creative. Got the chassis and speaker up on TV trays. Okay, nothing's too good for our viewers. So let's go ahead and strum a few notes. I'm going to home in on the control panel of the Bassman so that you can see what the control settings are and compare them to what you're hearing. Okay? Here's Jack peering out of his cat house, making sure that everybody is seeing to his best interests. What are you doing, Jack? And the guitar for this extravaganza is going to be the old trusty shop guitar, the Vantage V695 from back around 1980. Jack hawked his 59 Les Paul Standard, so we're just going to have to settle for second best in this video, and it'll be primarily in the humbucker position. Well, I guess that's about it on this video featuring the mighty Fender 6G6 Blonde Bassman amplifier, or as we affectionately know it, the garage sale special. We've seen many of its original and worn out components be replaced with new ones, and we've seen the circuit upgraded to the 6G6B form, which hopefully will provide the owner with many years of maximum tone and minimum headaches. If any of you out there in YouTube land have the missing transformer cover and or the missing blonde presence knob, please let me know and I will arrange to buy it from you, and I will send it to the owner so that he can install it. In conclusion, I want to give the traditional thanks to our Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors who have kept us on the air and advertising free. Should any of you wish to join them, I will put links in the video description to assist you to do so. And now it's time for our video's second feature, which in this case is easily one of the most outrageous ones that I've ever posted. As many of you know, I and some of my friends buy hot rods and old cars from around the country and bring them in here and modify them and improve them and then resell them. Well, I'm going to feature our latest acquisition, which I think is a car you're not going to forget very soon. Okay, I can tell you, I took a test ride in it and I don't think I'll ever forget it. Now, if any of this sounds interesting, and if it doesn't, I think you better check your pulse, then please stay tuned, because we're about to go on a little tour and finally a hair-raising ride that I think you're going to need some Dramamine for. Okay, so grab a beer, pull up a chair, and get ready for video number 2. Well, I thought you all might get a kick out of the latest acquisition in the family. This isn't my personal car, but I have access to it, and I thought I'd share that with you. 1959 Nash Rambler. Okay, and as you can tell, it's not exactly stock, but let's give it a look over, okay? We'll go all the way around it and check out the engine, which is the best part. Okay, so grab a beer, because here we go. You see the front end with the mighty Rambler emblem proudly emblazoned. Nice looking wheels, great looking exhaust. It's really like a pro street modification. Just nice as can be. Tiny little car. These have really gotten to be popular with the pro street crowd because they're so compact and they really lend themselves to this type of modification. The interior is actually pretty normal. Got a nice looking shifter and steering wheel. Whole set of really sweet gauges. Hopefully we can go for a ride, because this thing absolutely flies. Okay, as you'll see why in just a minute when we open the hood. Got the battery completely enclosed in a stainless steel compartment. Got, looks like one heck of a stereo, as if you would need it. The shut-off. You have to have that to be approved at a lot of drag strips in case something happened to the car, flipped over, God forbid. You can shut it off. Really slick. So, all aluminum block MKS LS3 Corvette engine. Actually, this one came from an Escalade. Okay, the injectors have been increased in diameter and the cam has been changed. So we're probably looking at close to 500 horsepower. I think it's like 373 gears. You see, it barely fits. But it's kind of shoehorned in here. But very nicely done. Very neat. came this way. Okay, we all know better. The underside is, if anything, more impressive than the outside. Beautiful suspension, completely handmade, TIG welded tubular frame, just state of the art. Fuel system, suspension, nice narrow rear tires. This is an absolute gem. You know, the underside like this, it really makes a difference. When you're in a car with this type of speed potential, you have to be sure that the frame and suspension are up to it, and in this case they're actually more than up to it. Okay, we're on our ride. I'm firmly strapped in here. Captain Harry at the controls. We're in a school zone, so we slowed down to 88. But I'll tell you, it rides firm, but very nicely. It sounds great. Not too noisy. Okay, let's just do a little mild spurt of acceleration here.
You ready, Doug?
I'm braced. Good God. I know what the space shuttle crew must feel like on the launch. Jeez.
Just watch. Past this truck.
Let's try just another little burst of speed because one is never enough. And other expletives. Jeez. No, it may be one of the fastest cars I've ever ridden. Incredible. But completely controllable. God for the good brakes too.
Oh yeah.
I'll get some shots from underneath. They're gonna clean it up, put it up on the rack and clean it up. But the engineering and all, and the suspension and frame, it's just absolutely fabulous. So that'll be maybe for another feature in the future, which is not easy to say. But no matter what, I can't get used to that. Amazing.